So welcome to all of you. My name is Betty Avila. I'm the Executive Director here at Self-Help Graphics, and I want to welcome you here to the Printmaking Summit Day 1. We are beyond honored that we have Alison Saar here to speak and help us kick off the first day here. I do want to acknowledge the folks who made this possible. So the LA Printmaking Society, who's our partner in this summit, was the connection to Alison, and we're so happy and grateful that you're able to bring this wonderful resource here. I also want to acknowledge our other funders of the Printmaking Summit generally, the Eastside Arts Initiative. And we have Lupe here who's representing, so thank you. The National Endowment for the Arts, as well as the Pasadena Art Alliance, which supported the Utopia Dystopia print project that's in the gallery, and the Mike Kelly Foundation. So none of this would be possible without the support of all of those funders, and we're very grateful to them.
I'm excited to welcome Alison Saar to Self-Help Graphics and Art, where many artists that have printed here delve into themes that are parallel to Alison's work. They resonate with community, are empowering, timeless, and poignant. Alison's artwork focuses on the African diaspora, race, sexism, and Black female identity. She is influenced by African, Caribbean, and Latin American folk art and spirituality. Her artistic trajectory includes prints, sculptures, and installations that incorporate found objects such as refurbished wood, old tin ceiling panels, nails, shards of pottery, and glass. And I recently heard an old interview of yours where you shared that the chainsaw was your favorite tool. And I'm only disappointed that I didn't ask you to do a demonstration. She's the daughter of the acclaimed collagist and assemblage artist Betty Saar and Richard Saar, also a painter and art conservator. She earned her BA in the studio art and art history at Scripps College in Claremont and an MFA at Otis Art Institute. She has been the recipient of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellowship, a New York Foundation for Arts Fellowship, 2 Artist Fellowship from the NEA, and the City of Los Angeles COLA Artist Fellowship. Her work has been exhibited at prestigious venues across the country and internationally. Please help me welcome Alison Saar.
Thank you. My first experience outside of school working with a print workshop was with Bob Blackburn in New York City, and he basically had a print studio. It was called Printmaking Workshop, and it was a similar sort of thing where he just opened the doors and people could come in and just experiment, and there were master printers there, such as Bob himself, who would come around and help you out, or just other people kind of finding their way and would come and help you out. And it's just, I think, such a rich and wonderful and giving experience, and I'm so thrilled to see that Self-Help Graphics has been able to maintain that for 46 years and running. Really glad they found this beautiful new space, and so thank you for having me, and thank you for LA Printmaking Society for inviting me. And my mother was once, when she was doing her printmaking, a member of this Printmaking Society, so it feels like a lot of things are coming full circle here today. I consider myself primarily a sculptor, and I got really interested in printmaking, I think maybe, as a result of seeing my mother working as a printmaker, and just being in love with the process really little on, but also because the sculpting takes so long, and the sculptures kind of go for a chunk of money, so I really wanted to have work that was more accessible, and I also wanted to have work that could be more, immediate and intuitive, and just allow myself to kind of play within the studio in 2 dimensions. But being a sculptor, I'm always kind of like feeling the pull between the flatness of paper and having things be more dimensional. And so I guess what was really been exciting for me in printmaking is trying to find ways of incorporating either found objects or found materials or different kinds of paper or different textures into the work. And so this is a piece that was pretty early on that I did with the Vinyl Haven Press, which is up in Maine on a little island called Vinyl Haven. And because it's an island, they still have like public dumps, so you could take stuff there, but you could also take stuff out of there, which was really great. And so I was meandering around and found this really beautiful piece of linoleum that had been all rolled up and crackled like floor linoleum. And so we cut the shape out and inked it up, and then basically made a lithoplate off of that. And then I also have a woodcut, and then the snake and the mouth were basically just a puzzle piece that you would stick in there on the woodcut. So it was maybe just like 2, maybe 3 runs. It was a pretty simple sort of thing. But when I was able to kind of use that material and say, oh, well, because, also my work, if you guys know my sculpture, it's really more involved with, sorry, it's making a lot of noise, found materials, and the idea that these materials have a sort of spirit or essence to them, or a memory of their own history. And so the idea that this linoleum could kind of like bring a little bit of its past and its history to this piece was really important to me. You can do the next one, thank you. And this is another piece I did with Vinyl Haven, and this was these scarves basically were printed, similar sort of thing. I'd found like an old chair back of an oak pressed wood chair, and then we also made a linoleum lithography block off of that. And so then these actually hang loose. They're just glued up underneath the plate. This piece is called Blue Plate Special. So I like the idea of having things be physical and dimensional. Next. So this is actually a print I did with Bob Blackburn's printmaking workshop for some print art thingy in New York City. But I wanted to show you this because I've kind of recently circled back on this sort of imagery. Primarily my prints are basically portraits of my sculptures. And so this is a little different in that it's more sort of pictorial, that it has a background and whatnot. And I love, when I first started making work, I did frescoes, which were really cool because you could have all these different planes that you could embed things in the plaster, and you could have like foregrounds and these kind of, there was a space for the unreal or the magical to exist in that view. And so I like that in this kind of thing you could have, these kind of incongruous images working within, a pictorial plane. Next. So I'm just going to show you a couple of sculptures and how they tandem up with the prints. So this one is called Clean Sweep, and then the print, we can go to the next one, is Sweeping Beauty. So, and this one's quite large. I did this with Toby Michelle at Angelus Press in Santa Monica, and he has this really huge bed. So I think this is maybe 5 by 3 by 5 feet or something, which is really massive. And because I work life scale, I usually work life scale, or I work like 1/3 scale. So that's kind of is reflected in my prints as well. But yeah, so this is just a woodcut with some weird stuff happening on the side, which is Bondo. Next. And then the other thing is I really love these kind of cool papers. So this is something that I got in New York called Nepalese cloud paper. You can still see the creases because it came folded, so you can see the line across the middle. But I didn't really mind that, and they're all really like, you can see the sort of decal is really, it almost looks like someone's been gnawing at it, which is kind of fun in terms of this imagery. And then this piece, Delta Do, is a collage. It's got chincolé, so all the bottles were printed separately and inked up separately and cut out. And then, I only made 2 of them, but they're different. So I also like the idea of prints and editions being varied editions, that no 2 are exactly the same, even though they have the same block. So that same block actually ended up being 2 different kinds of prints. But this is the one that's called Delta Do with her bottles in her hair. And then this is Lost Boys, which I did at PCC with Claudio Sticar. I had been collecting shoe soles for a really long time. I'd done a couple of pieces with shoe soles where figures were covered in them in suits. And so I had a few left over, and so we ran them through what did we do? We did a soft ground, and then we aqua tinted them, and then I burnished the faces up on them, so the faces were burnished out of that. And then those are physical strips of red cloth that are, physically punched a hole through the print and tied them up at the top and the bottom. Next. This is a piece called Tango, and it turned into a print of the same name called Tango. And I also did this at Pasadena Community College as well during the residency there, which was really fun to work with. I've done a number of prints with school presses, which I think is a really wonderful experience in that you're working with master printers, and then you're also working with students. One plus to it is you have an unlimited amount of energy and labor at your hand. But I would hope they find it a rich experience as well, that it isn't just a pain for them. But I really enjoyed doing that, and that we kind of all learn how to do these things together. And this piece is called Washtub Blues, which was with Shark Inc., which is Bud Shark in Colorado. Yeah. Next. It's a woodcut. Yeah. And then this is a piece, Janice, that I did with Vermont Studio Center, Sarah Amos, and she had decided that she wanted a non-toxic, totally green printmaking studio, and so this is all collagraph. We just used, sort of like, what do you call it, matte medium over illustration board, and I drilled holes in it for his hair, and the really black areas I just cut out and peeled up, and so it almost works as an intaglio, or as an aqua tint almost. And then also did a little painting with medium and carborundum to kind of create this sort of textured background behind the head. And then just straight draw into the cardboard to kind of make those indent things. So we inked it up and wiped it like you would an etching. And then the red nails, I hand painted in all the red nails. And I'm trying to think if the teeth were completely blank, or maybe I added some more white. So this is a piece I did called Compton Nocturne, and then the print of it would be one of the pieces I did with tamarind. Lithography is a challenge for me because it is so very, very flat. And I don't know, is the folks from Tamarind still here? I'm afraid to go back because I think they said, oh yeah, you can draw on it and then you can scratch a little bit of the wax off, and I think I basically engraved their stones. So I may never be invited back to Tamarind, and I feel that the ghost of this plate will haunt Tamarind forever, unless they really went in and ground a quarter of an inch off of their beautiful stones. But yeah, so it was a kind of a really interesting experience to do that, and it's something I should try again, I suppose, but I was a little intimidated by that process. Next. And then, so the other thing I tried to do, this is a piece called Equinox, and it's, I haven't really talked about the ideas behind any of these pieces, I'm sorry, but this is the story of Persephone as spring and her mother Demeter. So it's Demeter kind of up top, kind of squeezing her breast and expressing this milk, mourning the loss of her daughter who was taken into the underworld, and then Persephone, who was being fed pomegranates in the underworld, is holding 2 pomegranates, and so the pomegranate juice is flowing up towards the surface of the world, and the milk is flowing down into and they meet each other at where the underworld and the upper world come together. So then the print I did for that is this, and we printed out this really fine paper, and then I hand cut all of the paper and hand tinted the paper. So that hangs, like an inch in front of the print. And this was also a litho. Next. This piece is called, I usually have the title for that. It'll be on the next one. We can go to the next one. It's called Shorn. Give me a minute. And so this was something I did with Tandem Press, and again, they're a university press, so it's really wonderful to work with master printers and work with students as well. And yeah, so the idea of this piece is basically this female figure. A lot of these pieces, well, the other one, Equinox, kind of deals with my trying to come to grips with my daughter going away to school and having an empty nest. And so this one is kind of simultaneously a mourning and also celebration. And so a mourning in terms of like kind of like shaving your head and mourning, but also shaving your head and shaving your hair, even her pubic hair, as a sort of a release and a cleansing too. So it's kind of falls somewhere in between that. You know, there's the pluses and minuses of your children going away to school. And so then what was really exciting for me was working with, with Tandem Press, and I had been doing drawings on these found sugar sacks, and I'd come across actually a quilt that had been made with sugar sacks, just the plain ones, not the really beautiful decorated ones. And this was the liner of the quilt, and so I took it completely apart, and I love that it has the stains on it. You can see the little C and H sugar thing down at the bottom. It had seams in it. There had tears in it. So where you see the little white spots in her dress, those are basically holes in the cotton sack. And it was so thin, it was like a veil. And so what we did was they painstakingly, pressed them and mounted them on paper. And then we were able to print. They have a hydraulic press. Because a lot of people say, oh, how do you print on fabric? Because it wants to push it. So they have a hydraulic press so it can just come straight down on it, which is really great. But these ones were glued down, so it wasn't going to move so much. But this piece, Cotton Eater, comes out of residency in New Orleans, where I was looking at, it was, like maybe 8 years after Katrina, when I was doing my residency there at the Joan Mitchell Center. And there were still so many houses that were kind of like, red X's on the door, nothing had happened to them. You could still see the water, the watermarks, 6 feet up into the house. And, I just kind of was thinking, well, what happened to all these promises that New Orleans was going to come back bigger and better than ever? And of course, I think when people said that, they thought it was going to be, whiter than ever, and that they're going to push out all these communities that were basically submerged underwater in the 9th Ward and other parishes. Largely people of color, and so it was really heartbreaking to me to see that. And so I call this piece Cotton Eater, which is kind of relating to the lotus eater, which is in the Odyssey, where they're on this island and they eat these lotus fruit and become very lethargic, and they decide they don't want to go home. And it's just kind of like it's like eating the lies that the government feed us, that kind of lulling us into false complacency. And so that's kind of what this piece is about. Next. This is a sculpture I did called Mirror, Mirror, which is the title of my exhibition, now on tour. If anyone happens to find, it'll be at Scripps College in 2020. So, and there's also a catalog coming out at some point of it, but it's a show of all my prints. And so this sculpture turned into a print, which we may have to go. Oh, so Mirror, Mirror, the full title of it is Mirror, Mirror, or Mulatto Seeking Inner Negress. Being biracial and being perceived as being white and looking white, I'm always kind of felt that I had to try to really find, and embrace my black roots. And because I was really much closer with my mother's family and the black side of my family, that was really crucial to me in terms of my identity. And so this is a girl who's using a skillet as a mirror to see her black self. And then the print is also called Mirror, Mirror, but these are on also found sugar sacks. You can see we're using the back side of it, so the printing is on the other side of it. But again, they had holes in them. There's a really nice seam up there. And in some places where things were sewn, then you would kind of lose the impression of the print a little bit. But I love that, it's sort of a tug of war between what the material wanted to do and what I wanted it to do. But these were also printed onto glued down onto paper and then printed afterwards. And this is just 2 blocks. Keep it really simple, a white and black block. And then this is another piece where I found a similar sort of quilt, inside quilt liner, and it had been used so many times and worn so thin that it was like a veil. It was just so beautiful, and again, it had stains in it, and I love to think that, this fabric had experienced people sleeping and maybe people giving birth and definitely people having sex and maybe babies being born or people dying as well. And so I love this history on this space. And so so basically you can see a little bit, you can perceive a little bit of a weave on that. So we basically took the fabric and chincollated over the entire piece. And so you're looking through this veil to see this figure. And this is like cheery paper underneath, so you can see all the specks in it. But it's called haint, or haint blue. And a haint is a spirit that, they're kind of like out there looking for someone to latch onto. And often they'll be jumping on your bones in bed, so you got to be careful. And I don't know if you guys have seen the practice of painting the underside of roofs blue in the Delta and New Orleans and whatnot, and that's called haint blue. And basically the blue is supposed to confuse them so they don't come inside your door. And so this is my haint, and she's like ready to pounce on whoever's walking too close. So anyway, but I like the idea that she's kind of the veil, this fabric makes her the spirit world, that she's kind of somewhere between 2 worlds. Next. So this is a piece I did called Hades, DWP, and Department of Water Power. I don't have to explain that to people in LA, it's so great, but it's not always DWP elsewhere. And so again, this is kind of like still kind of trying to, work out sort of Katrina, and also looking back historically at the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. And I did this piece that was looking at the 5 rivers of Hades, and that as you cross each river, you lose something from the real world and gain something into the underworld. And so they all have their different properties. I had the poet Samia Bashir, who teaches at Reed College, write what I was thinking were labels, and then she corrected me after she wrote them and said, no, they're their voices. And actually, she's done this really beautiful reading of them. You might be able to find that an audio of that on LA Louver's site, I'm not sure. But to hear him read them, it's really beautiful. And so basically it kind of talks about all these sort of properties of these things. In the middle is basically the river of Oblivion. I'm blanking out on the name of it right now. But so that one is just clear water. And so then the print ended up, I worked with something called Cumbersome Press up in Portland, and she's a letterpress. And so we letterpressed the poems on, again, really thin sheer fabric, and then these were linoleums that we printed the 5 jars with, and then each jar's liquid is hand painted. And so that's like a book. And it comes in this really nice little portfolio that's been stained and everything as well. And then this brings me to kind of the last exhibition I did, and this piece is called Breach, which is, again, looking at the Great Mississippi Flood and kind of how, these people basically took everything that they could carry to levees to try to flee the flood. And so here she is kind of poling down the middle of the river. This piece, well, the middle of what was the river is now basically all over the place. And this piece is now in LACMA's collection, so if you happen to go by LACMA before they close their galleries at the Amundsen, you'll see her. But then we did prints of them, also at Tandem. And so these are on feed sacks, which would also be the sacks. They're probably from the 30s, so they're almost the same time the Great Mississippi Flood came about. And these sacks were also used for shoring up the levees. So I love that this kind of material has this history of actually being part of shoring up the levees and trying to kind of restrain the river from breaching its banks. And so there are 2 prints. So the female figure is kind of carrying all these things. So the male figure is carrying all the tools. During the Great Mississippi Flood, African American men were conscripted without pay to shore up the levees. And hence when those levees broke, they were not there to help their families evacuate or anything. And so he's carrying all the tools required of shoring up a levee, buckets and picks and axes and hoes and shovels and bags filled with sand. And then she is basically responsible for trying to reclaim or save everything that they own. Next. And then for all of those quilts where I took out the really beautiful plain linings, I had all these really beautiful old quilts on the outside. And so they were all pretty funky. I feel bad, you know, everyone's like, what, you cut up some quilts? But they're all like disintegrating. So I try to respect the artistry of the artist that made these initially. And so then I did this piece called Black Bottom Stomp. And so they're all unique in that they'll have different quilt pattern pieces. So you got 1, 2, 3 patterns of fabric in this one, right? Maybe 4. There might be a 4th one over on the side. So yeah, so we just cut them all this size and then just printed them. And so each one is unique in terms of what comes through in the print, depending on what the fabric is underneath it. And next. And so then I also did a series of pieces called, well, they all have individual names, but they're printed on handkerchiefs. And so I was kind of thinking of all these different kinds of blues. And so this one is called High Yellow Blues, kind of the tragic mulatta sort of story. And these are all printed on hand-tatted and hand-sewn white fancy handkerchiefs. And then the next one is Indigo Blues. And so to kind of talking about racism within the race, that if you're darker skinned, you have less opportunities available to you. And so I took a sugar sacks and hand dyed them in indigo and then hand sewed the rims and the borders of all of those. And then, so after doing the 2 female figures, I decided to give the guys a run. And then, so these are on like, this one is called Red Bone Blues. And this is like a 1940s handkerchief. I guess they still make them like this. Growing up, my job was to iron my father's handkerchiefs. So I have a real fondness for these. And then the last one is Coal Black Blues, which is printed on a shop rag. And it says, stay alert, stay alive. And then that's a Northwestern Railroad. And so they would use these shop rags. I mean, we actually printed this. We couldn't get enough of them to do a whole series of them. So we scanned them and then printed those insignias on the shop rags, but that would have been something that they normally would have done. And then, you know, I thought it was really kind of poignant, and that stay alert, stay alive really kind of pointed towards all the murders by policemen of African American males, and, well, males of all color pretty much. And then the Northwestern was really cool because Tandem is housed in a Northwestern train station turnabout. So that they actually have a train car in the space still. So I thought, again, it was kind of serendipitous that these images would be finding another interpretation in the same house that they would have been used in. Next. So this is a piece from a show I did at LA Louvre a year ago, maybe a little under a year ago, called Topsy Turvy. And this piece is called Topsy and the Golden Fleece. And so it's taking the character Topsy out of Uncle Tom's Cabin and kind of embracing her fierceness and her mischievousness. But in the story, you know, all of the slaves are gathered around Eva, who's blonde and beautiful and everything light and wonderful, and you know, she has this golden hair that, you know, is like difficult to even look at, and she's giving out strands of her hair to all the slaves that are standing around them, and it is thought that that was supposed to symbolize her gift of Christianity to the slaves. And so I decided to have Topsy to step up to the plate and say, well, if your power is in your gold, beautiful hair, I'm just taking the whole thing. And so she's got a sickle. She's basically scalped Topsy, and her scalp is actually gold leaf. The nice thing growing up working with my father, working as an art conservator, was that I knew how to do things like traditional gold leaf and stuff like that. So that's Topsy taking charge of things. And then we did a print, which I'm sorry this is such a poor photo of it, but again, she's almost invisible in that darkness. You can see the sickle and the dress, and then the hair is like a painted gold. Next. So this is the last project I did, which is or was at the Metro North in Harlem. This was a piece that was commissioned by Metro North and MTA in New York. Unfortunately, a customer found them frightening, and so they're being taken down. I know. And so we're hoping, I think they've maybe come up with something. They're going to reprint them paler than this and have 6 of them instead of 16. So, but I love that it kind of created these. These are basically shelters on the platform, so you didn't have to stand out in the cold. But I love that it kind of created these kind of cathedral sort of stained glass things. So I did these prints. They're 4 block prints. There's 16 of them, so we had 64 blocks. And I printed them each in black, and we sent them to Germany. And then in Germany, they made silk screens out of the prints, out of the blocks that I did. And then silk screen different colors on the glass, and then they fused the glass. So they actually bake the glass so it melts into that. So it has this really beautiful, rich color and tone. I think I have another image of that one. So there are one set in blue and one set in yellow. And because it's Harlem, I wanted to kind of talk about the history of the Harlem Renaissance and the history of music and jazz in Harlem and the dance and all of that and the nightclub scene. So that's kind of what we're looking at. So that kind of makes me sad. But I think the last few images are just those prints as prints, because these were done with Paul Maloney, a Maloney press, or is that what we call it? Maloney Printing up in San Francisco. And so we're then making a portfolio, a suite of 8 of them. So this one and that one, Torch Song, and Jitterbug, and Hoochin, Haint and Hooch. She's kind of, I lied, this weren't the last pieces. And so then this is the piece I did called White Guys, Guise. And then we did a print at Denton, Texas, and the University of North Texas. And so this would be the last print I did. And she's quite large. They've got a really huge, beautiful press. And so to make the wallpaper, we actually had digitally cut those little cotton bowls and stems. And then the bowls come out, so we were able to ink them separately and pop them back in as a puzzle piece. And then it was a black key block and a white block for her dress, and then a kind of bluish green block for her body tone. And that is the end. So, wow. Thank you. Well, especially the ones that are, these more recent ones were kind of taking that sort of caricature of Topsy in terms of the braids and kind of exaggerating them as being wild. I think Harriet Beecher Stowe kind of described them as her sundry little tails, which was kind of creepy. But with these ones where they kind of like tie these cotton bowls on them, it's kind of like camouflage because they're basically creeping through the cotton to she's got this iron, and on the iron you can see that the very tip of the iron has blood on it. And so it was a whole series of these, most of them were little girls that were basically having a revolution using the tools of their enslaved labor, such as a sickle and for rice and a hoe and I'm forgetting all the rest of them, a cane knife and all that as weapons. And so that's kind of what these ones specifically mean. But then the other ones, like the one with the bottles, is kind of looking at the southern bottle tree tradition, which is said to have come from the Congo in terms of having these bottles or objects that spirits will be attracted to, and then when they go, they get trapped in them and they can't escape. And I've just always been really intrigued with things kind of getting caught in one's hair. You know, I know when I was growing up, and I was always have big fights with my mother trying to comb my hair out or trying to iron my hair, and her threats that rats were going to make nests in my hair, sort of thing. But I loved it that it also kind of became a diary of who you were and what you were experiencing even that day. Like, I'll have big pieces of sod, the chunks of wood come out of my hair during dinner, sort of thing. So, and I think also because, again, my skin looks very white, but my hair actually can be perceived. I can see my African American roots in my hairs more. So that's also something I really have a tendency. You can see how in all these things I go back and again to hair. So it's I think it's what roots me and connects me with my ancestry.
For the pieces that are made out of cloth, are they framed? And if they are framed, did you have were there any challenges when it came to framing them?
Well, I think the challenge is for framers that want things to be square and perfect and all that stuff, and none of them are very square, so they have to kind of make them larger. The ones that are on paper, I guess it's just up to whoever buys them what they want to do with them. But I've done banners, and then I think like those ones, the breech one and the staunch one, the male and female figure that were on the granary sacks, because those were sturdy, so they can just be pinned up on the wall, sort of thing. But it's kind of up to whoever. I guess that's the trouble with even with paper as well. It's just how much if anyone's home is as dirty as mine, it collects a lot of dirt. So I guess it's up to whoever wants to take care of them. But I like things where they're out and you can see them. So when I do frame them, the ones that aren't basically shinko laid onto paper, I like that they be kind of hung in a deep box so they have some room to move and breathe a little bit. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Oh, a few more. Probably the biggest ones we've done are like 20. The cotton eater one, because I only could fit 6 pieces out of that quilt piece, so it was an addition of 6. But then we took the blocks and printed them on paper as well, so they didn't feel like it was such a waste of their time. But yeah, so a lot of them are limited just by what the fabric I have. I think 16 was maybe for the black bottom blues, because that was how many pieces I could make that didn't have too many big holes in them. So yeah, sometimes those things determine it more than that. Have you ever done an edition of 1? Well, I guess the one Delta Do is an edition of 2, just because we didn't have time to do other ones, and the printer didn't want to pursue them, so we just printed 2 of them. And then when I print stuff myself, sometimes it's 1 or 2, just because I don't know I can't register, so I'm at the mercy of professionals to help me do that sort of thing. But yeah, sometimes they're smaller editions, or sometimes I just embrace the funkiness of misregistration. So, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the materials used for your sculpture, like what you use for the hair and the body for your figures?
Yeah, so the sculptures are carved wood. I use a chainsaw. So I used to, when I lived in New York, I used to be able to get timbers out of the dumpsters, because in the 80s everyone was tearing down their places and pulling stuff out. And then when I moved back to LA, I had less access to things like ceiling tin and stuff out of dumpsters. So I buy the wood at like Home Depot, and hopefully it's farmed wood, and then laminate it together and carve it with a chainsaw, and then a chisel, and then I cover them. Because it's green wood from Home Depot, it has to be covered with something. So I either use copper, which I then patina. So white guys is copper. And then I'm trying to think what other ones I shoot. The other ones are usually with the ceiling tin, but the smaller ones like Topsy, who's only 2.5 feet tall, I don't cover, and that's like basswood. But yeah, and I'm always looking for cool materials and neat stuff. So even though I don't have access to dumpsters, I walk with my head to the ground many times. Anyone else? Mary had her hand up.
I was just curious what you have next, because you like to work with schools, and what other schools are you planning to work with?
Well, I'll probably go back to Tandem sometime next year. And then my show Mirror Mirror is traveling, so it's going to go to Fayetteville. Where else? It'll go to the Chasen, which is where Tandem is at University of Wisconsin, and then it'll be at Scripps. So it's mainly going to. I mean, that entire exhibition is the collection of Jordan Schnitzer, who has a real mission for collecting prints and showing them in educational galleries. So it's really great, and they also did a great catalog. But so I love that it's going to. Spaces where students are coming and seeing them. So that's traveling for 2021, I think is traveling a lot. The next thing I've got coming up is I have a show at the Armory. Yay! And Pomona College of Art. So that's going to be fall 2020. And at Pomona, it'll be the opening of their new museum. So that's really exciting as well. So I think that's the next show that I've got scheduled that's coming up. You'll all have to wait a while. But yeah, that's basically where we're at. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit more about the piece in the public transit shelters? And did you push back on that at all? I mean, like, just the notion of somebody saying it scared them, like one person, and having that be a trigger to change the entire piece?
Well, if one person complains and it goes directly to the security, and security felt that if one person felt threatened, and I don't want anyone to be spooked by the stuff or feel threatened. I mean, there's other places to stand and wait, but I don't want, and if, God forbid if someone did get mugged because they couldn't discern the difference between my shadows and a real shadow. So I wouldn't want to have that responsibility. It's just disappointing that that was not thought of before we went through all of that. And hopefully they'll find another place. But, I tried pushing back. I said, what about this space? Because there's lots of other spaces even on the platform. And they just said, no. So I think they are going to try to do 6 of them. But they are going to send them, they're going to have Germany make a whole new set of these 6 ones. And they're just going to be much paler. So they're not going to have that intense color, which is too bad. So luckily I got someone to go and document them. And but yeah, and I actually had wrote a Twitter, an Instagram saying how I was saying farewell because they were deemed dangerous. I was very dramatic about it. And they called me up and said, would you mind changing that? Because it ended up being like a big, storm of people, kind of media storm. But, well, of course it was big for about a day. So that's the whole thing about those things where I was like, oh my God. And then the next day we're on to Beyonce, so.
That just happened, didn't it?
Yeah. We installed them in January, and then they decided within a few weeks to take them down. And I'm not sure if they're still up or not, but. Yeah, that's the question. It's complicated in that it's a dual commission between the Metro North and the MTA, and the MTA is New York City and Metro North is going up. And because Metro North, it's their station, came out of their budget, and so they say they own them, because MTA was going to try to find another station to put them in. But now if it can only go in another Metro North station, that's the only station. Well, I guess they have one that's the only kind of independent station that they have in New York City. So the other one would be, I think Mount Vernon is the next stop. So they may go out, but I was like, this is specifically about Harlem. I want them to stay in Harlem. So I don't know. We'll see. It's kind of sad. But, I called my lawyer right away, and they said, well, it says in here that they do have the right to take them down. So, but again, like I said, I don't want anyone to feel like spooked, and I really would hate it if someone got injured because they couldn't figure out what was what. So, whatever. When you get invited to go to these print workshops, you go there and you're kind of like, everyone's standing like, okay, so what are we doing? They're all ready to jump on whatever you can come up with. And I'm just like, let me look at what I've done in the past. And so that's kind of part of how that goes. And I think also in the sculpture, there's limitations in terms of what can and can't be done. Like paint could actually be floating. and things can be flying and floating, and you can have other things happening in the background. So I appreciate in working with 2 dimensions that you can kind of talk about the ambience around those pieces a little bit more, even though they do, many of them, I mean, like you saw, end up being almost straight up, interpretations of the sculpture. But so yeah, some of them work more, are more readily translatable to a graphic interpretation than other ones. Some of them just don't work. I mean, and I think a lot of them, especially ones that are dealing with objects, often don't translate as well, just because the object is so much, that found object is so much about what that sculpture is. And I have yet to really, I mean, Mirror worked out okay, you could kind of tell that's a skillet, but it could be misinterpreted, whereas the sculpture wouldn't be. So that's kind of, those are my rules.
Well, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.